Right, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Joe, you're huge and shredded, the absolute pinnacle of the human form, a specimen like no other. Surely you didn't make any mistakes. I get it. You know, I understand why you would say that. Totally see where you're coming from on that. If I was you, that is what I would think about me as well. You know, the whole pinnacle thing, me. However, my job here is to like get as many comments as possible that call me the realist. You know, can everyone leave a comment please and say, Joe, you're just the realist. What I like about you is you're so real. You're a real YouTuber. I'm a real boy. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm trying to be funny. I'm not. I want to just get into the video. These are the mistakes that I made. So all jokes aside, these are all the mistakes that I made as a newbie lifter, and hopefully if I tell everyone about them, then it might stop them from making the same mistakes that I made, because that's the whole point, isn't it? We're all humans and we have the ability to place ourselves imaginatively inside the brain of others and imagine what experience is like through their perspective, and therefore, despite there being a million motivational YouTube videos out there talking about how important failure is, we actually have the capacity to learn from other people's mistakes as opposed to having to necessarily make them ourselves. So hopefully today you can learn from mine. And whilst on the topic of learning, I'm going to do an absolutely seamless segue into the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. And if you don't know what Skillshare is, obviously I'm about to tell you, otherwise this would just be a rubbish ad, wouldn't it? It'd just be terrible, mate. Skillshare is an online learning community where there are thousands of courses and classes for people to take so they can learn stuff, whether it is some of the more creative things like animation, illustration, photography, video editing, to the more practical knowledge such as the business and entrepreneurship side of things. There's just something for everyone, mate. And one course that I've actually been following along with is about essentialism by a guy called Greg McKeown. It's called Simple Productivity: How to Accomplish More with Less, but it's not just like the typical productivity, write a to-do list type drivel that you usually get. It's actually more about the kind of philosophical side of recognizing what you need to prioritize. And I think that's pretty sick because a lot of the stuff actually applies to lifting just as much as it does to any kind of work that you're doing. But if that's not your thing, there's loads of other courses you can do, whether you just want to learn a new skill, expand your cognitive horizons, or even just stave off boredom. Obviously when you run out of Joey D videos to watch on YouTube. And to sweeten the deal, Skillshare is giving away 2 months free premium membership to the first 1,000 people that click the link in the description of this video. I'm going to put that top link so you can go down there, click it and get your 2 months free if you're in the first 1,000. And after that it's about $10 a month. So I think that is a pretty sick deal, mate. All right, I'm gonna get into it. Number one, emphasizing some muscle groups and neglecting others. All right, so the first training split that I ran was actually a 3-day rotation. It was chest on the first day, shoulders on the second day, and then biceps on the third day. And that was it, mate. Obviously, not quite ideal. I didn't train back for the first maybe 6 months of my lifting quote unquote career, mainly because you couldn't see that in the mirror, and I didn't hit legs for probably 2 years, and then even when I did start training legs, it was quite sporadically, and as such, guess what happened? I developed disproportionately, and thankfully after over a decade of lifting I've managed to construct a somewhat balanced physique. Let's just not mention the carbs. However, I did have to spend some time bringing up those lagging body parts, and I certainly would have been better off just starting out giving an even distribution of work to each muscle group from the very beginning. Now it is obviously quite legitimate to emphasize some muscle groups more than others if some are stronger or weaker and some are more responsive to training, but you don't know that until you have been training for a while. A lot of beginner lifters come to me and say, what can I do for my upper chest because my upper chest is lacking? And I'm like, it's not your upper chest that's lacking, it's your chest that's lacking, because it's your body that's lacking because you've been training for about 53 seconds. And so nothing's really had a chance to develop yet, and you don't know which muscle groups are more responsive and therefore which you can work less than others. So by all means, look at your physique a year or two down the line and then start tinkering with your training, but just don't jump the gun too early on that. that. And when starting out, you should definitely start with a balanced workload. Number 2, cutting too soon / caring too much about being lean. Now this might be the single biggest mistake that beginner lifters make, and when I say biggest, I just mean it has the most overall impact on the physique long term. The fact is, making gains is easier earlier on in your lifting career. A, because you're more responsive to the new stimulus, and B, because for most people, when they start lifting, that actually coincides with a period of their life when their testosterone production is also highest, and that's typically late teens or early 20s. And therefore, it makes sense that you should make the most of those years by building as much muscle as you possibly can. Now, it just so happens that that period of your life typically tends to be the period in which you care most about being lean, right? Because there's no point, or there's less point being a shredded 40-year-old when you're living out in the sticks with 3 kids, and Ibiza just isn't on the cards, mate. However, I do want to say this, you have enough time. If you stay consistent and train hard and smart, most people should be able to get to a point where they are in a really good shape, both from a muscle mass perspective and a leanness perspective, whilst still being young enough to enjoy and take advantage of that. But that does mean being patient with starting your first cut. I would say for the average skinny kid who starts lifting, I wouldn't even be thinking about a cut for the first at least 2 years of training. And even then, when you do, don't take it to the extremes and try and get down to 8% body fat or anything crazy shredded like that. Anyway, I definitely did a few too many dieting phases, and if I didn't, maybe I would be carrying a little bit more muscle mass right now. Personally, I'm not going to lose too much sleep over that, but I know that a lot of people want to be bigger than I want to be. So number 3, not drinking enough fresh lemonade, mate. That's not serious. Let's carry on. Not following a program. Now, it might be a bit of a stretch to actually call this a mistake, because I definitely think there are positives and benefits to just sticking to a rough training split and being able to go into the gym and make up the workouts within that split as you see fit. So if you're on a push workout, you can just go in and say, right, which push exercises do I feel like doing today? And that is particularly appealing and definitely fun and more engaging, especially when you are first starting out training and you might view following a program as something that could potentially be quite monotonous. However, from a progress perspective, if that is how we are defining a mistake, then you're certainly wasting some precious time here. Because although you will definitely make gains anyway, particularly early on, without following a program, those gains would certainly be better if you were combining your newbie gains with following a structured program. And the question is really if you would find following a program a little bit limiting and potentially boring, and that is genuinely a fair question, because we're all here to enjoy it at the end of the day. For me, I trained for probably a solid 6 years before I even started following a program whatsoever, and I made plenty of gains within that time. I'm not trying to sell programs here. You can get by without doing it. However, when I did start following a program, that was noticeably the best period of gains I have been through, save for the first year of my lifting. Number 4, not tracking my lifts. Now again, I can see how this could seem a little bit tedious for people starting out, especially, you know, the young bucks coming up in the game. You just want to get in the gym, smash some lifts out. You don't want to be like noting stuff down, do you? Because it seems boring, but I can't really emphasize enough the importance of tracking your lifts, and it really did make a huge difference for me. So let me just set the scene a little bit. I was in my early 20s, always training pretty consistently, but was also partying pretty hard most weekends. Now, I was never much of a drinker. However, I definitely lost a good few hours of sleep over the weekends, and so I would get into the gym on a Monday and I wouldn't feel 100%, and it was at that point that I would just say to myself, you know what, maybe I'll just do higher reps today and therefore I can go a bit lower weight, and I would act as if that's somehow the same as going heavier on a lower rep set, as opposed to what it actually is, which is just something completely different, right? So I was excusing myself and letting myself off the hook because I didn't have a set of numbers that I had to look at and stick to. Now, when I did start tracking my lifts and therefore keeping my reps consistent for periods at a time, I had something that I could look at and say to myself, right, you have to at least match that, but in an ideal world, beat it. And I was still feeling just as it was before. You don't get enough sleep, mate, you don't feel great, and that is what it is, regardless of whether you're tracking your lifts or not. But I got through it, I did what I had to do because I was looking at the numbers. And if you are looking at those and you know that that's what you did last week, it takes a real kind of human not to stick to them. Like, your self-respect is gonna take a big blow, mate, if you don't hit those numbers. And so you might suffer a little bit more in that workout, but that small bit of accountability accumulates over the long period into real life gains, mate. I honestly, in those moments, I realized like this is when you actually make gains. So that made a big difference for me, and I think everyone else should do it as well. Number 5, too much volume, not enough frequency. Right now I follow a full body training split which has me hitting each muscle group in some fashion at least every other day, but often more. However, the volume for that muscle group in that particular session might be as low as 5 sets. And this is really the opposite end of the spectrum to what we commonly know as the bro split or the bodybuilding split, where you will go in the gym and just focus solely on 1 or maximum 2 muscle groups, for example chest and triceps, and then you will go heavy on the volume. So you might do 4 or 5 different chest exercises within the same workout. And believe it or not, there was a time when I actually took this to the extreme and I gave an individual day to each muscle group. So I actually had a day fully dedicated solely to quads, not legs, just quads. And yes, you're wondering, I did have a hamstring day as well. Just hamstrings, mate. And so it was taking me 10 or more days to get around everything, including my rest days. To say that is less than ideal is like saying Chernobyl was unfortunate. It is a wild understatement. Listen, you can make progress hitting each muscle group once a week, maybe even less, but twice is dramatically better. And in general, the more frequent, the better, although you do experience quite diminishing returns on that. Generally speaking, higher frequency is better, and there's no real minimum amount of volume you need to do per session, provided the intensity is there for the volume you do and your overall weekly volume accumulates to a meaningful amount. Number 6, bulking / binging too hard off the back of a cut. So to this day, I have never actually come off the back of a cut and maintained my leanness for as long as I originally intended to, although I am certainly better at it these days. To some extent, I will rebound a little bit too hard and regain a bit of fat, maybe a little quicker than I originally planned to. Now, at some point, if this has been going on for year after year, as it has, you do have to realize that maybe you're not just some weak-willed, terrible person who loves jammy dodgers, man. Maybe it is somewhat of a natural human tendency to overeat after you've been in essentially what is a period of mild starvation. So you do have to definitely cut yourself some slack on that front, because it is quite normal to have lower than average self-control after you've been through a period of restriction.
I'm using a pancake as a plate for pancake crumbs. What am I going to do for this pancake though? I'm going to need another pancake.
You know, you see it everywhere. After a show, everyone gains like 20 pounds in the first like 2 minutes, mate. You know, it's 10K challenge, 15K challenge. When's it gonna end? Now I'm in the bath, surrounded by Cheerios. You know, who knows? I'm in a vortex of gluttony and I don't know how I'm gonna get out. Anyway, sorry, just having some flashbacks. Where was I? And the issue with this isn't that it's particularly bad for you from a health standpoint, because like very few of us are rebounding to the point of obesity or like dangerous levels of overweightness. Overweightness is a word, but it does mean that the subsequent bulking or gaining phase is cut a little bit shorter, because you will arrive at a point where you have body fat levels such that you need to cut that little bit earlier. So it means that the time you can spend dedicated on gaining muscle is a little bit shortened. And if you're able to do this in a much more controlled manner, you could potentially, in theory, prolong that period with which you could focus on just gaining muscle, therefore longer gaining phase, hopefully more muscle gained before you actually come to cut again. And those periods do really need to be as long as you can make them. So essentially what you need is some kind of method and process for coming out of a diet without completely messing everything up. You basically, you know, you're easing the lockdown on your belly, mate, are you? You're easing some restrictions and gradually trying to get back to normality without being a weirdo who just dreams about yum-yums. Anyway, that could be a topic for a whole video on its own, so maybe I'll make that someday. But yeah, that is a big mistake that I've made that has inevitably had an impact on my progress over the years. Finally, I just want to say that some mistakes are inevitable. You might not make these mistakes now, at least I hope not after watching this video, but you will, I'm sure, make your own, and that is fine. Honestly, it's all just part of the process. It's even part of the fun. You don't need to start at the age of 16 and get everything exactly right from the beginning. You can make mistakes and still get where you want to get, provided you are consistent and always willing to change your methods should new, better ones come along. So by all means, avoid the aforementioned pitfalls, but don't worry about having to get everything right from the very start. You are just a human, so work hard and most of all, have fun. See you later.
Jordy Lenny is my hero.